He's next.
Wow. I put my germs all over him.
Wow, he's on.
I'm not sick. I just have
I'm
a
gonna give every-
migraine.
I'm gonna give everybody gloves.
Yeah.
Take your gloves.
That's gonna be a tongs.
Mr.
right?
Mayor, we like. Good to do that. You just- Everybody has their own song.
So 5, 10, 4.
Mr. Mayor, we live.
Great, thank you for that, Mark. So today is October 4th, 2023. The time is 5:07 PM and I'm calling to order the Baldwin Park City Council special meeting. City Clerk, can I have a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Mayor Estrada,
Here, sorry.
Mayor Pro Tem Garcia. Let the record reflect that Mayor Pro Tem Garcia is not present. Councilmember Avila. Let the record reflect that Councilmember Avila is not present. Councilmember Ayala.
Here.
Councilmember Damian.
Here.
Thank you.
Mr. City Clerk, both Councilmember Avila and Councilmember Garcia are not going to be able to make it for this meeting.
Noted. Thank you so much.
All right, City Clerk, thank you for that. So at this moment, I believe we have we're going through the public communications. If there's anybody looking to speak, City Clerk, anybody looking to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, we have not received requests for comment.
All right, so at this moment, we will move on to the open session and we have a presentation regarding the general plan update presented by Ron Garcia, Director of Community Development, and Nick Baldwin, City Planner.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Tonight's presentation again is the housing element summary. As you know, we were happy when we received the announcement that the city received certification of the housing element. After working on the document for about a good 2.5 years, we were working on that concurrently when we were putting together the downtown specific plan. I know that the last presentation went before the council was in July. So we want to just go over a brief summary of the housing element, what we have to look forward to for the next 8 years in facilitating the production of housing throughout the city of Baldwin Park. So I'll now hand the baton over to our city planner.
Sorry, Nick, could you check that the podium's microphone is turned on?
All right, thank you. I think I got it resolved now. I'll start again. Thank you and good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. My name is Nick Baldwin, City Planner, and tonight I'll be presenting a summary of the housing element that was recently certified by the state in August 2023. Next slide. The housing element is a required element of the city's general plan. It is the only element of the general plan that has to be updated on a regular schedule every 8 years. For the Southern California region, the current 6th cycle of the housing element period spans from 2021 to 2029. Next slide. These parts of the element are used to establish existing baseline conditions and includes information such as population and housing characteristics, which are in the needs assessment, regulatory constraints to the housing development, land resources available to meet the city's identified housing need, and evaluation of how well the city implemented its last element. A new law went into effect in 2021 that also requires an in-depth analysis related to fair housing. All of these components are the foundation for the housing plan, which includes the city's housing goals, policies, and implementation programs. Next slide. The housing element is in the city's plan for meeting its fair share of the regional housing needs. The Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA, is the number of housing units HCD determines is needed on a regional basis. SCAG, the Regional Planning Agency for Southern California, that develops, they developed a methodology to distribute these units to each jurisdiction. The allocation identified for Baldwin Park is 2,001 units. To come up with these numbers, SCAG looked at not just the future need, but the pent-up need that hasn't been met. Moving forward to the next 8 years, the housing element must be drafted to show how Baldwin Park will accommodate its RENA number of 2,001 units. The city has done this by indicating to the state projects that are in the pipeline as either proposed or approved projects. The city has also reviewed potential new sites that include any vacant sites, underutilized sites that could see redevelopment, and the potential for accessory dwelling units within existing neighborhoods. Next slide. Now, it is important to note that RENA is not a construction obligation. The role of the housing element is to show the city's land use and zoning policies will allow for a certain level of development, but the city is not required to build these units. Next slide. This table summarizes the sites inventory, which includes the number of units identified through approved and proposed projects, ADU projections, and vacant and underutilized sites in the residential, mixed use, and downtown zones. This table indicates a surplus of 326 units. HCD strongly recommends that jurisdiction identify units beyond the RENA number as a buffer. Next slide. Now, the foundation of the housing element is the housing plan, which lays out the city's goals, policies, and programs. The plan addresses 5 topics that are required to be addressed under state law, and they include a goal H1, which is to conserve and improve existing and affordable housing stock. H2, assist in the development of affordable housing. H3, provide adequate sites to achieve a variety and diversity of housing. H4, to remove governmental constraints to housing development. And H5, promote equal housing practices. In the following slides, I'll go over some notable programs under some of these goals. Under goal H2, program H2-4 calls for inclusionary housing ordinance. Now, the task was to study and if appropriate, adopt an inclusionary housing ordinance to the program. And the city's consultant has concluded the report. And they'll be presenting this to the city council on the regular meeting on the 18th. Next slide. Under goal H3, 3.0, we have programs that will implement strategies to support ADU targets and projections. We also have programs to address homelessness by amending the zoning code to support the development of emergency shelters and motel conversions. Next slides. Goal H3 also includes programs that facilitate the development of affordable housing on sites used in previous housing elements and religious institutions. H3-6 was completed in July of this year when the city council approved the creation of a zoning overlay that regulates sites used in previous housing elements to meet RENA. Next slide. Under goal H4, there are several zoning updates that will need to be completed to implement the housing plan. One of which is developing and adopting objective design standards, which is an effort that was completed in June 2023. Next slide. Here are some additional zoning updates under goal H4.0, which are identified by HCD as ways to address potential governmental constraints to the development of housing. I would like to point out that H4-5 has been included in the housing plan to promote the development of more affordable housing through the state density bonus law rather than having applicants apply for a variance. Next slide. Moving on to goal H.5. H5.0. We have programs to affirmatively further fair housing that focus on increasing housing mobility, access opportunity, and increasing public investment in low opportunity areas. Next slide. H5-4 also promotes civic engagement as well as developing anti-displacement policies as appropriate. Next slide. Now, it's been a long road to get here. Baldwin Park has first submitted the first draft element in October 2021, following a year of significant engagement and drafting of the housing element. There were an additional 2 rounds of formal review with HCD based on comments received at the end of each review period. The 4th submittal was an informal review that required additional minor revisions. With the incorporation of these revisions, the city received verbal confirmation on May 10th in a call with HCD that with the incorporation of these final revisions, the housing element would be considered compliant with state housing element law. And the adopted housing element was submitted to HCD's for final review, formal review in July to affirm that all the required edits have been made and no new changes are proposed. And in response, the state certified the housing element in August 2023. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nick, you made a point of highlighting the fact that what's in the element is not a construction requirement, right?
That's right.
But to the extent that the housing element has been certified by HCD, for us to essentially comply with what we said we would do, to what extent are there's a sense of an obligation to go through with the plan?
The obligation is to follow through with what we promised in the element. So there are changes that we put in the housing element that says rules we're going to change and policies to adopt. Those are the obligations. And as long as we complete those, then we've satisfied our obligation to HCD.
And are there annual submittals, Ron? Yes.
Yes, those are the annual progress reports that are submitted. We got one coming up in early 2024 to show the progress for 2023. So it's a pretty intensive process. We start looking at this in December to submit that report to the state in April, the beginning of April, to show our progress with the construction of housing.
And one more point, with the certification of the housing element, does that release funding that they might have been holding back until subject to the approval of the housing element?
That is correct. Yes, they did kind of hold that over us. They held that over a lot of cities, but thankfully we weren't at that point because they knew that we were in good faith working towards getting certification of the housing element. But what this does is it now solidifies that we don't have to worry about not receiving funding from the state because we don't have a certified housing element.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
One quick question. And in order for us to, because this addresses the RENA numbers, right? So in order for us to get to those RENA numbers, the ADUs or construction of ADUs fall within adding to those numbers?
That is correct. Yeah. Yes.
And I remember from Thursday's roundtable, you mentioned that there was going to be a pre-plan for the ADUs?
Yes. Yes. So there, the COG, the San Gabriel Valley COG, funded the development of pre-approved ADUs. Nick this morning just had a check-in meeting with the COG, where the hope is that anyone wishing to build an ADU, that there is a pre-approved ADU plan. They can pick it off the shelf So that way they can submit and they don't have to really worry about finding an architect to be able to develop those plans. So that's a huge
Yeah.
cost that is saved to the homeowner wishing to take advantage of that opportunity.
So it's not only cost savings, but it's also the time where you don't have to worry about the architect designing the plans, going back for plan review and then having to make any modifications to the plans and all that. So it's kind of a more of a speed through process, as you can call it.
And that is essentially what the state wants us to do.
Okay.
They want cities to incorporate processes that streamline the development of housing. And that's one way of doing it. We think just forecasting from now until this RHNA cycle to 2029, we see the numbers increasing with ADUs, which will significantly help meet that requirement.
When do you anticipate that we will be rolling out these pre-designed plans or?
So, yeah,
Yeah,
Nick,
it's a little early to say. So we're still in process with the COG, and we need to see exactly what they're going to produce. We had a pretty good idea about what we wanted, and we're still in we're still checking in to see with them what's actually the final product is going to look like. So it's a little early to tell.
And then once we get these already set to go, are we going to conduct any type of community workshops to let our residents know? Perfect. All right.
Yeah,
That's all I have.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is there any more questions from council? Not, thank you for the presentation, very informative. Sure, we keep this in mind as we continue to make decisions on development. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Nick. At this moment, I believe we are all done with our open session and we will go ahead and recess to closed session and we will see everybody at the regular meeting at 7 o'clock.